The overhead fluorescent strips buzzed and blinked, a rhythmic spasm that felt like a warning signal I couldn't interpret, though I was too emotionally paralyzed to care. 19 years, 2 months, and 16 days. That was the specific count. The duration St. Mary's Home for Children had served as my solitary anchor in the world. I sat opposite the director, clutching a flimsy container that held the sum total of what the state of Oregon considered my life's worth. It hit me then. I was crossing the threshold from ward of the state to data point. Just one more drifter aging out with zero destination and nobody anticipating my arrival. Mr. Hollister gave that telltale cough again, the tick he always displayed before delivering hard truths. He was a good soul at heart, honestly. His temples were balding, spectacles forever slipping down the bridge of his nose, and his workspace was cluttered with ceramic souvenirs. Those mugs spoke of business trips and family gatherings, rituals belonging to people with actual kin to share the holidays with. He was merely a cog in a machine that ground up compassion and replaced it with rule books dense enough to serve as body armor. "Dela," he began, pushing his frames back up. "You realize that at 19, our legal obligation concludes this afternoon. We have secured a short-term spot for you at the transitional facility over in Southeast Portland. You'll be assigned a staff member to assist with employment applications and filing for aid." The speech was automatic, polished by years of overuse until it held no sharp edges, just like smooth pebbles in a stream. I wondered about the dozens before me who had occupied this seat, listening to this script while the same emptiness expanded inside their chests. I just gave a small nod. The standard response when grown-ups offer assistance that doesn't actually solve the problem. This program was just code for a cramped flat in a dangerous neighborhood, bunking with 3 strangers I'd never laid eyes on. We'd all be fighting for low-pay work, acting like grown women when we'd barely had the chance to be kids first. Having a supervisor just meant more dates to memorize, more paperwork to file, and inevitably, when the grant money dried up or I slipped up on a meeting, I'd be solitary regardless. The path led to a dead end, but it was the only road open to me. Hollister pushed the carton toward me. I gathered it close, recognizing the heft of it. It contained the standard paperwork that summarizes an abandoned existence. A birth record with unknown for the mother and a void for the father. Charts of every vaccine ever injected into my arm. The graduation certificate I earned the previous spring. The parchment was creased from years in a battered filing cabinet, sitting next to a slender folder labeled Della Thornton in pale type. I'd scanned those files during the required workshops, the ones where they explained credit scores to kids with no cash flow and budgeting for funds we didn't possess. The content was sparse. I was abandoned at Portland General at 4 days of age, not a single letter in the swaddle. No identification attached to my person, simply a female infant tagged Doe until a compassionate nurse picked Della out of the air, and the name adhered like a shipping tag on unclaimed freight. The authorities had hunted for relatives, back in the beginning according to the records, but there were no leads. My birth mother was a phantom, dissolved in the Oregon drizzle. My biological father was a riddle nobody cared to solve. I'd existed as an orphan my entire timeline, a character in no one's narrative. Yet, as I cracked the file for a final check of my history, greater than, this asset belongs to you by law. 0 liabilities, no strings attached, meaning it's untouchable. Greater than, unless you surrender it voluntarily. Suddenly, I spotted a fresh edition stuck between an old grade school evaluation and dental charts from when I was 12. A heavy, ivory envelope, high-end paper worth more than every piece of clothing I owned. My identity was scripted on the face in sweeping loops, the type of calligraphy, characteristic of a person educated long before keyboards killed the art of writing. "What's the story here?" I queried, raising it toward the blinking bulb. "Mr." Hollister's expression softened into pity, or perhaps gratitude that he had a parting gift other than the generic dismissal kit. "That came in roughly 6 months back," he clarified, shifting in his seat. "A legal group out of Montana mailed it. They gave strict orders to withhold it until your departure. We authenticated the source. It cleared every check. It's your name on the front, so go ahead." Montana. I'd never set foot in that state. I was a complete stranger to everyone in that town. My only knowledge of the place came from library hardcovers, devoured during quiet afternoons when retreating into paper worlds felt safer than surviving my real one. Tremors ran through my fingers as I manipulated the heavy envelope. The return address read, Brennan Legal Services, Silver Creek, Montana. A seal of deep burgundy wax sat on the reverse, an artifact that seemed pulled from a different era entirely. "Any idea what this is about?" I ventured. He gave it. The cover note merely stated it pertained to your lineage and was to be surrendered to you upon your majority or departure from state care. Lineage. That single concept struck hard, knocking the wind right out of me. I'd never laid claim to a past. I was the girl without a backstory, devoid of context, lacking any anecdotes about my origins or which ancestor bequeathed me this chin. Yet here, at the precise moment of my discharge into the open world, armed with only a meager box of belongings and hope, a ghost from the past was reaching out. I broke the seal with unsteady hands, extracting the items gently, terrified they might disintegrate. The image captured a woman. She appeared to be 70-something or perhaps 80, posed before an aging red barn with a swaying roof line and flaking timber. Her iron gray hair was swept back into a no-nonsense bun, the style of a woman with chores to finish and zero interest in mirrors. Decades of exposure to the elements had etched a map onto her face, marking every joy and sorrow. Yet her gaze, even through the sepia haze, held a crinkle of genuine, frequent amusement. She was dressed in denim and beaten work boots, her flannel sleeves hiked up past the elbows. She leaned against a fence post with the relaxed posture of a person completely at home in her skin and on her land. A haunting familiarity lingered in her features, like catching a glimpse of oneself in a muddy stream, or knowing a stranger's soul before hearing their name. I flattened the paper, the crisp sound filling the silent room like dry leaves. The script mirrored the envelope, deliberate and firm, though a slight quiver betrayed age or perhaps infirmity. "My dearest Dela," it started. I paused, needing to inhale. No soul had ever addressed me with such affection. Not in 19 years of state-sponsored holidays, rotating caseworkers, and transient guardians. If this reaches you, I am gone, and you have finally aged out of the system. Forgive my absence. I wish I could have held you and spoken these truths face to face rather than leaving them on a page. I am Marlene Thornton, your grandmother. Your mother, my daughter Rosalie, loved you beyond measure, even if she couldn't demonstrate it. The ink swam as hot tears breached my defenses. I belonged to a line. Marlene, Rosalie, you're just a kid. You're in over your head. I know what belongs to me. The territory will break you. Then I'll stand my ground. These basic truths, the kind of roots most people are born knowing, felt like receiving a compass after wandering the wilderness for 19 years. I forced my eyes back to the page, my heart tight in my chest. Rosalie was 21 when you arrived. She was terrified, not of you, never of you, but of the chaos her life had become. She fought a war with substances, Della. It's a sickness that hijacks the young and doesn't let go easily. She attempted to sober up. She desperately wanted to craft a life you deserved. But the addiction overpowered her resolve, leading her to the most agonizing choice a mother can face. 4 days after your birth, she took you to that Portland hospital and pleaded for your safety, for a home more stable than hers. Then she vanished where I couldn't follow. I had to pause again. My grip trembled so violently the stationery rattled like a frightened animal. "Mister," Hollister slid a tissue box my way without a word. I snatched a bunch, burying my wet face in them. "I searched for 3 years," the letter went on, "until the authorities located her in a motel near Seattle, lost to an overdose. She was only 24 when I had to walk into that sterile room, identifying my child in air thick with industrial bleach and heartbreak. My mother finally had an identity, Rosalie. She had adored me, battling internal darkness I could barely comprehend, until that darkness ultimately consumed her. This wasn't the magical homecoming I had dreamt up during sleepless nights in the group home, pretending a perfect family was coming to rescue me. Yet this was the cold, unvarnished truth, and strangely that gritty reality held more weight than any fairy tale I had ever invented. "We aren't finished," the lawyer said softly, his gaze holding a quiet, weary kindness. "Read at your own pace, Della." I signaled I was ready and pushed forward. "I remained unaware of your existence for 2 full years after we lost Rosalie." The handwriting continued. "A caseworker finally located me all the way out here in the high country. The letter explained that my mother died giving birth to me, and that I was immediately swept into the foster care system. You were already 6 years old by the time I found you, a little girl lost in Oregon, unaware that a grandmother in the high country would have moved mountains just to hold you." My chest tightened, the air suddenly stuck in my throat. "I fought for you, Della," the writing continued. "I promised God I would bring you home, but I was 68, struggling to keep a dying ranch afloat in the wildest corner of Montana. The social workers deemed me unsuitable. They listed my age, my solitude, and my empty bank account as reasons to keep us apart. They insisted a child needed more than an old woman clinging to a scraping of dirt. They claimed strangers with youth on their side were superior to your own blood. The pages shook as my grip tightened. She had actually fought for me. This stranger, this ghost of a relative, had attempted to claim me, to build a sanctuary for us both. Yet the Oregon authorities, with all their cold regulations, ruled that her love was insufficient. They determined I was safer as a ward of the state than as her kin. "So I took the only path left to me," she wrote. "I ensured that a legacy would be standing here for you when you came of age. I was denied the chance to give you memories, Della, but I can offer you freedom. The deed is in your name, all 270 acres. The homestead, the outbuildings, every inch of earth our family has held for 4 generations. It is a humble inheritance now. The herd was sold off years ago, and the structures have weathered beyond what my old hands could repair. But it is soil, child. It is a foundation. Take it if you wish." I glanced back at the snapshot, Marlene posing by the weathered red barn, her hand resting on the rail as if anchoring herself to the world. Here was my grandmother, the solitary soul who sought me out when the rest of the world turned away. Wallace Brennan is managing the paperwork. You will find his contact details below. Reach out to him. Visit the property. And never doubt that while I could not hold you, you were in my prayers every morning for 13 years. You descend from a line of resilient women who loved with fire and endured even when the odds were insurmountable. That grit runs in your veins, Della. That iron will. Remember your roots. The closing was stark. Your grandmother, Marlene Thornton, followed by a date scrawled 8 months prior. She penned this while facing her end, aware we would never embrace, aware that ink on paper was her only bridge to me. I lost myself in that image, tracing the lines of Marlene's sun-beaten face under the weak fluorescent hum of Mr. Hollister's workspace. Suddenly, the mirror image was undeniable. The bridge of the nose, the hard line of the jaw, the specific upward slant of the eyes. It was me. For 19 years, I had gazed at my reflection and seen a stranger untethered to humanity. Now I held the gaze of a woman who carried my genetics, my story, my very essence. Mr. Hollister let the silence stretch, respectful of the moment, before asking, "What is your next move?" I shifted my focus from him to the note, and finally to the image of the matriarch who had cherished me from 700 miles away for over a decade, silenced by the law. "I'm heading to Montana," I declared, the words solidifying my reality instantly. Mr. Hollister offered a slow, knowing nod, verifying that I grasped the weight of my choice. "That is a significant leap, Della. You are abandoning the known for a geography you have never walked and a house you have never entered. The place might be a ruin. Survival out there is not guaranteed." He wasn't trying to crush my spirit. He was simply fulfilling his duty to ensure I wasn't acting on impulse. But I had endured 19 years in group homes where I owned nothing, not even the bed I slept in, where choices were dictated by boards and social workers, people who would never, "He is deceiving you." Why trust me? Because I saw him break us, greater than, have to wake up and deal with the aftermath. For 19 years, people who had to glance at a folder to recall my name dictated my path. I was done with familiar. I craved something that belonged to me. "What is keeping me here?" I whispered. "A bunk in a rough district and minimum wage stacking cans? Up north, I own dirt. I have a piece of the world that bears my name, a legacy that is actually mine." Mr. Hollister had no rebuttal for that. The truth was unassailable. He fished a card from his drawer, scratching a sequence of digits on the reverse side with a drying ballpoint. "That is my private line," he said, sliding the card over the desk. "If you hit a wall, or just need to hear a friendly voice, dial it. I am serious, Della. You might be aging out of my caseload, but you do not have to vanish from the earth." I slipped the card into my jeans, feeling a rare warmth that is kindness. Amidst a bureaucracy that reduced children to mere statistics and manila envelopes, Mr. Hollister made a genuine effort to recognize the person behind the paperwork. That small grace mattered, even if it was powerless to repair the deep, structural fractures of our reality. I walked out of his office clutching a simple cardboard box and a picture of a grandmother I was destined never to know. Treading the corridors of St. Mary's one final time felt otherworldly, akin to waking from a long, clinging dream that was finally letting go. A handful of younger children sat transfixed in the lounge, the cartoons on the television blaring at an ear-splitting volume. I offered a wave, but they remained glued to the glass. Indifference was just how you survived in a place like this. Folks disappeared constantly, and forming bonds only guaranteed more pain when the inevitable departures happened. Beyond the doors, the October sky over Portland hung low and heavy, a damp, gray sheet teasing a downpour that refused to fall. It was the sort of chill that settled deep in the marrow, adding an invisible weight to the soul. I trudged 6 blocks to the public library on Belmont Street, a sanctuary where I had whiled away years reading about distant lands I deemed unreachable and families who actually cherished their own. Woman manning the front desk, Mrs. Kim, lifted her gaze from the monitor and offered a warm smile as I entered. Petite and in her 60s, she sported silver-threaded hair and spectacles that seemed permanently docked on her brow. Her kindness had been a constant for years, from suggesting good reads to turning a blind eye when I lingered after hours to escape the group home's gloom. "Dela, word is today marks your final stretch at St. Mary's. How are you holding up, dear?" "I'm fine," I replied, reciting the standard fiction used to avoid complicated truths. "Truth is, I need a terminal. Got some research to do." She pointed a thumb at the bank of machines against the rear partition. "All yours, honey. No rush." I claimed the seat most distant from the entrance and launched the internet. My first move was entering the number from Marlene's note to see what hits it generated. Wallace Brennan's legal practice popped up on the screen instantly. The site was straightforward and businesslike, evidently built for folks in rural Montana who appreciate utility more than sparkle. His office managed wills, land disputes, and farm-related legalities throughout Silver Creek and the nearby towns. Navigating to the bio section revealed Wallace Brennan's portrait, a man nearing 60 with gentle eyes and a rugged complexion that hinted he wasn't always office-bound. The text noted he had been an attorney in Silver Creek for 28 years, focusing on passing down ranches and farms. It seemed promising, a man who grasped that soil was not just an asset, but a heritage. Then I typed in the name of the town itself. It was a tiny municipality, hardly reaching 3,000 souls based on the latest count. Located in Montana's northwest pocket, it sat where the Rockies tapered off into vast, endless plateaus. The search results confirmed my mental picture. Immense horizons and skies that commanded every frame. It was scenery that rendered you insignificant, but in a liberating sense, not a scary one. The main drag resembled a set from a classic western. Brick facades, angled parking for trucks, and flags whipping in the perpetual breeze. You could not find a spot more distinct from Portland if you tried. That contrast called to me more than I cared to confess. I located a community news portal and browsed the latest headlines. Council debates over paving funds. Scores from varsity games fought under the lights on chilly autumn Fridays. A fluff piece on a local matriarch marking her 100th year at the Civic Hall. Routine rural affairs. The sort of mundane existence I had only ever observed from the outside looking in. Then I stumbled upon a piece from 9 months back, the title making my lungs seize up. Local rancher Marlene Thornton, dead at 81. The headline hit me like a physical blow, choking off the air in my throat as I clicked the link. Marlene Thornton, a fixture in Silver Creek and owner of the Thornton Ranch, left this world quietly on March 3rd, held in the company of close friends within her own home. She was renowned across the valley, respected for her stubborn self-reliance, a way with horses that people swore was magic, and a quiet habit of showing up when her neighbors were in a bind. She leaves behind a granddaughter, Della, currently of Oregon, and will be. Sorely missed by the Silver Creek folks, who were proud to count her as one of their tribe. A private goodbye was held per her wishes. Instead of flowers, she asked that support be sent to the Montana Cattlemen's Foundation or the local library. Beloved, generous, missed. I stared at those 3 words until they were branded onto the back of my eyelids. My grandmother wasn't a ghost. She was a pillar. She was someone who mattered, someone who wove herself into the fabric of other people's lives. And even from the grave, she made sure to carve out a space for me, declaring to everyone that I was her kin, that I belonged. I brought up a map, tracing the long, jagged route from Portland all the way to Silver Creek. It was a trek of over 700 miles, winding through the dry side of Washington and the Idaho Handle, before cutting into Montana near Thompson Falls. Driving would take 12 hours straight, a moot point since I didn't own a set of wheels. I scoured the transit schedules, piecing together a patchwork itinerary that was my only shot. A Greyhound would haul me from Portland to Spokane, then I'd swap to a regional bus heading through Missoula, and finally catch a shuttle running the milk run along Highway 200. All told, I was looking at 18 hours of travel. And that wasn't even factoring in the waiting time between rides. A one-way fare to Spokane was $83. My entire life savings sat at $96. That was 3 years of scraping by at St. Mary's Kitchen, earning $2 an hour in a vocational program that was really just cheap labor dressed up as charity. After the ticket, I'd have exactly $13 left to keep myself fed and safe during an 18-hour trip into the void. The margins were terrifyingly thin. 1 flat tire, 1 missed bus, 1 surprise fee, and I'd be stuck on the side of the road, halfway to a life I couldn't quite picture yet. But staying wasn't an option. I asked to use Mrs. Kim's landline, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly misdialed the number from the legal notice. Someone picked up on the 3rd ring. A woman with a bright, professional tone and a slight mountain twang. Brennan Legal Services, how can I help you? I swallowed hard, deepening my voice to sound like an adult handling business, rather than a scared kid standing on a ledge. This is Della Thornton. I'm calling regarding the estate of Marlene Thornton. I have a letter here advising me to speak with Mr. Brennan. Silence followed, then the rustle of files being moved. Oh, Della, yes. Mr. Brennan has been waiting for this call. Please hold on. The line switched to soft acoustic guitar, and I stood there, my heart battering against my rib cage. A moment later, a man's voice filled my ear, gentle and steady, the kind of voice that made you want to let your guard down. Della, hello. I'm Wallace Brennan. I'm so relieved you called. First off, please accept my deepest sympathies for the loss of your grandmother. Marlene was a rare sort, truly one of the best people I've ever encountered. She talked about you all the time near the end, even if you two never got to meet. The words knocked the wind out of me. She had claimed me. She had told real people, people who saw her every day, that I was part of her story, even while I was absent from her life. Thank you, I croaked, barely getting the words out. I only got the letter today. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. Wallace's voice dropped, thick with understanding. I can only imagine. It's a lot to take in all at once. Let me give you the broad strokes. Marlene was very specific about how she set this up to protect you. The ranch, that's 270 acres of pasture and woods, the main house, the barn, all the outbuildings and gear. It all goes to you. She placed everything in a trust designed to unlock on your 19th birthday, or the day you aged out of the system, whichever happened first. My brain stalled on the numbers. 270 acres. If that land were in Portland, I'd be a millionaire. Out in the wilds of Montana, the dollar value was lower, but the fact that it was mine, that it was a home, was priceless. There is also a liquid asset account, Wallace added. Roughly $4,000 earmarked for immediate costs, property taxes, urgent repairs, whatever you need to get your footing. Marlene didn't want you showing up empty-handed. $4,000. The figure didn't even sound real. That was more wealth than I had ever held in my hands. It was more than I thought I'd ever see. And the title is clean, he assured me. No bank loans, no liens, no legal tangles whatsoever. I have got to shoot straight with you, Della. That land has not seen real labor in roughly 4 years. Once Marlene started fading, things slid. The main house requires work, and the fencing is dilapidated in spots. The animals are long gone. It is far from a ready-to-go enterprise. He hesitated, and I sensed him weighing his phrasing. However, the earth itself is rich. The structures have good bones, as we say. And it is all yours, no strings attached, should you accept it. It all comes down to if you are willing to take it on. I did not waver for a heartbeat. Absolutely. I'm heading to Montana. I detected a note of ease in his tone, perhaps a grin. Excellent. Marlene was banking on that answer. How soon can you arrive? I glanced over at Mrs. Kim hovered near the cart, ostensibly shelving returns, but her posture gave her away. She was hanging on every syllable. I did the math aloud. I could hop the morning bus, provided the fare didn't zero me out. I'm sitting on $96 total. The run to Spokane eats 83 of that. The line went quiet, a heavy hesitation settling in the silence. Here is the plan, he finally said. You get your feet on the ground in Spokane, and I'll have a wire waiting. $200 to carry you through the last leg. Call it an early draw on the estate. Marlene wouldn't want you starving or stranded just to prove a point. The tension snapped, leaving me so lightheaded I had to clutch the corner of the circulation desk to keep my knees from buckling. Thank you, I breathed. Honestly, I don't have the words. We burned a quarter hour nailing down the specifics. Where to snag the cash in Spokane, which connection ran to Missoula, and the final haul up to Silver Creek. He dictated his personal cell number, making me promise to ring him if the wheels fell off at any point along the way. When the call ended, I wasn't just treading water anymore. I held a roadmap in my head, a genuine path forward that felt suspiciously like hope. Mrs. Kim slid a warm sheet of paper across the counter, evidently busy while I had been bargaining for my life. It was the transit timetable, the essential routes slashed in bright yellow ink. Her gaze held a weight I couldn't parse, a depth of farewell that transcended the usual librarian-patron dynamic. You watch your back on that ranch, Della Thornton, and when you arrive, don't you dare forget that you've earned your place there. Every single day, you have a right to a home. She stopped, her voice dropping to a murmur. Your grandmother would have beamed to see you. I went rigid. How could you possibly know about her? A shadow of a smile touched her lips, mysterious and sad. The world is smaller than it looks, honey. Stories travel. Go on now. Don't let that bus leave without you. Before I could press for answers, she jammed a small box into my palm. It was a burner phone, sealed tight in plastic. A parting offering that spoke of protection rather than simple charity. I stepped out as the sun dipped behind the gray silhouette of Portland, brushing the clouds with bruised purples and burnt orange that lent the grit a momentary grace. My final hours in Oregon were spent waiting out the dark in the Greyhound terminal, dozing in fits and starts on hard molded plastic, hugging my cardboard life to my chest, my mind drifting to high country, and the ghost of a woman who had loved me across 700 miles of silence. Dawn brought the 6:15 to Spokane. I boarded with a pack that held my entire existence. 3 changes of worn clothes, a toothbrush, Marlene's letter and snapshot, and the paperwork from St. Mary's. Plus the lifeline Mrs. Kim had pressed on me. The coach carried that distinct scent of industrial cleaner fighting a losing battle against years of close-quartered humanity. The upholstery was a tapestry of travel. Fabric worn smooth and stained with the ghosts of spilled coffee, dried tears, and endless miles. I claimed a window spot mid-ship and rested my head against the cool pane, watching the familiar gray grid of the city unravel. Concrete yielded to subdivisions, then fields, and finally the vast, lonely expanse of the eastern state that travelers usually just sped through. We spanned the Columbia River Gorge just as the early light hammered the water into a sheet of beaten silver. My mind wandered to the settlers who had clawed their way along this track 150 years ago, chasing rumors of a better life. In a way, I was one of them, driving toward a question mark with empty pockets, praying the destination justified the departure. The geography shifted by slow degrees as the clock ticked on. The damp green of the coast faded into arid hills and sagebrush under a sky that stretched impossibly wide. We traded passengers in dusty towns I couldn't name. Hermiston, Pendleton, LeGrand. Names drifted by, but I remained anchored, terrified that any sudden movement might wake me from this fragile second chance. Spokane meant a 4-hour halt. I collected the $200 Wallace had wired, a sum that felt heavy and miraculous in my jeans, and treated myself to a hot meal at a nearby Greasy Spoon. The server, a woman in her 50s with weary eyes, poured my coffee with a warmth that felt startlingly real.
"Where are you off to, sugar?"
"Silver Creek, Montana," I answered, taking over my grandmother's cattle run. The confession tasted strange, like I was trying to speak a language I hadn't mastered yet. Her expression shifted, eyes widening with respect. "A ranch? That is a blessing, hun. That is dirt under your feet. A foundation. Do not let a soul talk you out of it or swindle you." I gave her my word, blissfully ignorant of the toll that vow would take. Later, over the sink in the women's room, the cheap prepaid in my pocket vibrated. Unknown caller. A local Montana prefix. I picked up, wary. "Dela speaking?" The man's tone was devoid of warmth, sending a chill down my spine. "Who is this?" "Just a concerned neighbor." "Stay out of Silver Creek. That land is not yours, paper or not. Head back to Oregon while you have the chance." My pulse spiked. "Who are you? How did you get this line?" "My name is irrelevant. My warning is not. You are blind to the reality out here. You do not know the players involved. Go back to Portland. Let Marlene Thornton and her dirt rot. You have no home here." The connection severed before I could fight back. I remained frozen in the fluorescent hum of the station bathroom, clutching the silence, trembling. I was being watched. Someone was desperate enough to hunt down my number just to keep me away. Fear almost won. For a second, I thought about obeying him. Returning to the city, the halfway house, the invisibility of a life where I didn't matter enough to be threatened. It was the safe bet, the logical retreat. But I was finished with being logical. I was done surviving on scraps of safety. Marlene wanted me there. She had held that ground for 13 years, waiting for my return. No faceless coward was going to steal my birthright now. I wiped the call log and marched back to the terminal, jaw tight, hands surprisingly steady. If you're still reading, I have a question. Have you ever faced a moment like that? Where your head screams, "Run," but your soul whispers, "Stay." I want to know your story. Leave a note below about a time you jumped into the dark. Follow along if you have not, because you will want to see what I found at the end of that road, and the identity of the man on the phone. The truth nearly broke me. The ride from Spokane to Missoula burned 6 more hours. We wove through jagged peaks and followed rivers running cold and blue. Idaho dissolved into a smear of pines. Then the sign appeared. "Welcome to Montana. Big Sky Country." Crossing that line triggered something deep inside me. A quiet sense of arrival. The air seemed to sharpen, the sunlight hitting the slopes in a way that made the world look high definition. I rolled into Missoula just after midnight. Another sleepless night on a plastic bench, this station tighter and lonelier than the last. A guard did his rounds, beam sweeping the shadows, offering me a silent nod of acknowledgement. By dawn, I was running on nerves and stale machine coffee. Yet I felt a magnetic pull. I was close to something that was actually mine. The last leg was a community van rattling down Highway 200. Opal was behind the wheel. Silver bob, laughter etched into her face, salt of the earth. She was the town chronicler, greeting every passenger like long-lost kin, asking about their herds and health. When I told her where I was going, her eyes lit up. "Silver Creek? You must be Della. I would bet the farm you are Marlene's grandbaby from out west." I sat back, stunned. How could you possibly know that? Opal's laugh was warm as a hearth. "Darling, this is the boonies. Gossip moves faster than this van. Marlene never stopped talking about you. She showed your photo to the whole county. We have been waiting for you to come home." It turned out my grandmother had passed my photo around like a holy relic, introducing me to a community of strangers who had been waiting for me all along. "Tell me about her," I murmured, sinking into the back seat as Opal steered the van out of Missoula. "My grandmother. I never got to meet her. I mean, really. I never even got to shake her hand." Opal glanced at the rear view, her gaze softening with a deep, remembered fondness. Marlene Thornton? She was made of iron and grit, the toughest soul I ever crossed paths with. Kept that spread running solo for near on 30 years after she was widowed. She wrestled cattle, broke colts, and mended wire in storms that sent grown men running for cover. But don't let the steel fool you. Underneath, she carried enough love to fill the whole valley. If you were in trouble, Marlene didn't wait to be asked. She just showed up. When trouble hit, she was the type to show up with a warm casserole and stick around to fix whatever was broken. I tried to conjure an image of this unknown kinswoman, my own flesh and blood, a paradox of grit and grace, self-sufficient yet giving. The blueprint of the woman I yearned to become, but lacked the manual for. "She never stopped speaking your name near the end," Opal murmured, her speech softened by the stroke that had slowed her down a few years back. She used to muse aloud, "Bet Della has a way with horses. Hope she inherited my mule-headedness. She needs to know she comes from a line of survivors who don't quit." Tears stung my eyes. I really missed out on knowing her. "You did, sugar. You did. But you made it. That would have brought her more joy than anything. She ached for your return. Home. Such a tiny syllable to hold that much burden. The 3-hour trek from Missoula to Silver Creek snaked through canyons where the river shimmered like molten ore in the dawn. Peaks towered on the flanks, their summits already frosted with the season's first powder, stark against a sky of piercing indigo. I had never witnessed terrain so raw. I never conceived of land so desolate, yet somehow brimming with spirit. Eventually, Opal gestured toward a huddle of structures ahead. "There she is, Silver Creek. Census counts 2,800 souls, give or take the newborns and the buried." The settlement emerged from the haze. First came the scattered homesteads with sprawling lawns and work trucks idling in the drives. Then the main drag, a carbon copy of the archival snaps I had seen in Portland. Masonry facades boasting hand-lettered shingles. A cafe revealing red booths through the glass. A supply shop with rockers lined up on the timber porch. Old Glory whipped in the breeze guarding the mail depot. Opal idled the van before a mercantile place, its glass frontage pushing everything from elk tags to sourdough. "My stop," she said, swiveling to look me in the eye. "You will find your way fine. Brennan's place is 2 blocks down, left-hand side." "Hey, Della." I froze, bag half-shouldered. "Watch your back on that spread. And don't forget what I told you about Marlene. Getting you here was her dying wish. Whatever comes down the pike, know this. You were desired. You were cherished before you took your first breath." I alighted into air, sharp with fir resin and hearth fires, and an underlying scent, faint, like a fresh start. The October gust stung my face. Freezing compared to the city, but I was numb to it. I had arrived. 19 years, 700 miles, and a lifetime of drifting later, I stood on solid ground. Brennan's practice was squeezed between a tack shop and an insurer, its shingle creaking in the draft. I shouldered the door, triggering a jingle above, and stepped into a room exhaling the scent of ancient files, tanned hide, and coffee that had stewed since sunrise. The clerk beamed with immediate familiarity. "You must be Della Thornton. Mister, Brennan is ready for you. Head on back, first door left." He stood as I entered, offering a hand that felt worn but welcoming. In the flesh, he mirrored his portrait. Etched features, gentle gaze, the stance of a man more comfortable in a saddle than a swivel chair. "Dela, a true pleasure. Take a load off. Thirsty? Coffee, maybe?" I declined, mind racing too fast for thirst. "I just need the truth. What did she leave behind? What is expected of me?" He nodded, retrieving a bulging file. "I hear you. Let's handle the logistics, then we will tackle the heavier stuff." "Heavier stuff?" He paused, measuring his response. "Marlene intended for you to unearth the family legacy in your own time. She felt you needed to walk the land before you carried the weight of its past. But there are hard truths you need to hear." My mind flashed to the call at the Spokane depot, a voice on the line warning me to retreat to Oregon, claiming I had no right to the land. Wallace's face hardened. "Did they give a name?" "No." Caller ID was hidden. He fell silent, jaw clenching. I had prayed this day wouldn't come, though I can't say I'm shocked that it has. "Turns out your grandmother wasn't an only child. She had a younger brother, Vernon. They hadn't spoken in the last 20 years of her life. A silence she maintained for good reason, and exactly why she ensured he wouldn't see a single dime of her estate. Vernon acts like he owns that land by blood right, and he isn't the sort of man who walks away quietly when he doesn't get his way." "Her brother," I echoed, the reality settling in. "A great uncle I didn't even know existed. Vernon Thornton. He's local enough to be a problem. Lives over in Thompson Falls, maybe 40 miles down the road. 25 years back, he sold his portion of the homestead to a mining outfit, knowing full well it would break Marlene's heart. He took the cash, blew it on foolish gambles, and hasn't seen a red cent since. The man has lived in the red for as long as I can remember. He looks at your inheritance like it's the winning lottery ticket that will finally clear his ledger." The weight of his words sank in, heavy and cold. It explained the menacing call. A blood relative, hungry for what I'd been given. "Does the law stand on his side?" I asked. "Absolutely not," Wallace replied, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "We drafted Marlene's final wishes to be bulletproof. I made sure there wasn't a single loophole he could exploit. However, the law won't stop him from trying to make your existence miserable in other ways. Expect bullying, gossip, maybe even coercion to get you to sell." "I'm not budging," I stated, shocked by the steel in my own tone. I didn't travel 700 miles just to run away from a man my grandmother wouldn't even trust with a patch of dirt. A genuine smile broke across Wallace's craggy face, soft with respect. "Marlene warned me you were hard-headed. Said it's in the blood." He fanned the documents out over the mahogany surface. Deeds, tax filings, and topography maps marked with aged crimson ink. "As of sunrise today, this is your legacy. 270 acres. It's a mix. Pastures down in the valley, timber up on the northern slopes. The main house went up in 1962. 2 beds, 1 bath, and a wraparound veranda where your grandmother spent her happiest hours. There's a barn, too. The shingles need attention, but the frame is as solid as a rock. Couple of sheds for gear, plus a checking account with $4,216 to keep the lights on for now." He pushed a heavy brass keyring toward me, the leather fob softened by decades of handling. "That'll get you into the cottage, the stables, and the shop. You've got the Caldwells about 2 miles west if you need anything. Good people. They checked on Marlene constantly when her health declined. To the east? Nothing but national forest. Means you'll never have to worry about encroachment on that side." I lifted the keys, testing their heft. They felt real. They felt like mine. "One last thing," Wallace added, his demeanor darkening slightly. "She left a final note, instructed me to hand it over only once you were physically here. She wanted you to grasp the scope of the gift before you read the history behind it." He extended a second envelope, this one secured with that same deep red wax. My name scrawled across the front in a script I was beginning to know by heart. "I'll step out so you can have a moment. When you're finished, I'll take you up to the property personally." She'd want your first look at the place to be with someone who knew how much she cherished it. He slipped out, the latch clicking softly. I sat in the stillness, clutching the paper that held the last piece of my grandmother. Messages hoarded for this exact second, reserved for when I had finally chosen this life. I cracked the wax and smoothed out 2 sheets of stationery, covered in her meticulous loops. The ink wavered more here than in the previous note, evidence of a trembling hand, writing in the twilight of her life. "My dearest Dela." The words stared back at me, heavy with affection. Just that opening phrase was enough to break my heart for all the years we lost. "If this is in your hands, you found your way to Silver Creek. You could have remained in Portland, chosen the safe route, stuck to what you knew, but you didn't. That choice defines you. You have courage, Dela. More courage than I possessed at your age, and certainly more than your mother was allowed to develop. You descend from women who weathered storms simply because they refused to bow down. That resilience is in your marrow, child, even if you haven't felt it yet." I paused, pressing a palm to my sternum to keep my breath steady. There are truths I must share now, things too heavy for that first note. Facts regarding your mother and our history that are your right to know, even if the knowledge brings pain. Rosalie didn't flee Silver Creek solely due to her demons. She was chased out. Vernon, my own brother, made her existence a living hell the moment she carried you. He called her a stain on our name, claimed her pregnancy was proof of her failure, and demanded she vanish before she brought more shame to his door. She was barely 20, just a scared kid, and I failed to be the shield she needed. I stood by while Vernon turned this house bitter, pushing my girl until running away felt like her only survival option. That mistake never sleeps. I will carry that weight to the grave and likely past it. Once she was gone, I turned over every stone looking for her. I paid investigators, harassed clinics, drove miles to any town she might have drifted toward. But she stayed hidden until the trail evaporated. When the call came about that Seattle motel room, I took that guilt as my own. I carry it still. But listen closely now, Dela, because this part is the heart of it all. Years before we lost her, she reached out. She rang the main line in tears, wanting to get clean, wanting to fight for you and herself. She begged me to drive out, bring her back to Montana, and help her build something solid again. The message never made it to my ears. Vernon picked up while I was out fixing fence lines up north. He told her I was done with her, that she was dead to us, and to never dial this number again. And she believed him. How could she not? He was family, a fixture since her birth. She couldn't fathom that kind of malice, couldn't guess he was lying through his teeth. So she severed the connection and slipped back into the life that eventually consumed her, convinced her own mother had shut the door one last time. The truth stayed buried until 2 years back, when Vernon got loose-lipped at a tavern in Thompson Falls and boasted to the wrong person. Gossip travels fast in this valley, and it found its way to me. When I cornered him, he didn't even deny it. He claimed he was protecting the family name. He reckoned a dead niece was better than a shameful one. That moment, I excised him from my life and the inheritance entirely. I resolved right then that every acre and dime would go to you, Dela, leaving him with nothing. He stole my child. I will be damned if he takes her daughter too. Tears blurred my vision until the ink swam on the page. Mom had tried. She had reached backward for a lifeline, for the safety that should have been guaranteed. Instead, the hateful man intercepted her, fed her lies, and pushed her back into the void that finally claimed her. Vernon Thornton hadn't simply caused a rift with my grandmother. He had dismantled my mother completely, effectively ending her life years before her heart actually stopped beating. And now he expected to inherit the land. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to finish Marlene's last words. I am not sharing this to fill your heart with poison or vengeance. You need the full picture, because Vernon is coming for what you own. He will cheat, twist words, and intimidate, because that is the only way he knows how to operate. But you have got steel in you, Della. You made it 19 years on your own without a soul to tell you your worth. Yet you are standing here, ready to take back the legacy that was always meant for you. When you get on the property, head straight for the barn. Look in the northwest angle where the feed bins sat. Pry up the loose plank, and you will find a lockbox I have kept safe since I found out you were alive. It holds every keepsake I have of Rosalie. Plus one other thing. A secret for your eyes only. Sending love across the distance that divided us. Your grandmother, Marlene. I creased the paper carefully, holding it against my chest as if the contact could transfer her spirit into mine. Pulling myself together, I dried my cheeks and stepped out of the office. Wallace stood in the waiting room holding 2 coffees. He saw my expression and just gave a slow, understanding nod. Ready to head home? More than anything. We climbed into his battered Ford, the dashboard sun-cracked and the upholstery polished by years of sliding in and out. The cab held the scent of dark roast, dry grass, and something distinctly capable. The aroma of a man who makes his living from the soil and offers no excuses for it. We rolled out of Silver Creek, leaving the hardware store and the diner behind, passing a white, steepled church glowing in the afternoon sun. Blacktop gave way to gravel within minutes, cutting through pastures where cattle drifted behind split-rail fences and wood smoke ribboned up from farmhouse chimneys into the crisp air. "Tell me about the folks nearby," I asked, staring at the passing fields like I was in a trance. "The Caldwells?" "Frank and Dorothy," Wallace replied without missing a beat. "Both in their early 60s. They have farmed the section abutting Marlene's for nearly 40 years. Never had a cross word between the 2 households. For the final 3 years of Marlene's time here, Dorothy made sure a hot meal arrived at her door every single Sunday, without fail. Once the stroke took away her ability to manage the stove, Frank stepped in to patrol the fence lines and patch up the outbuildings whenever he found a spare moment. "But why?" I asked, struggling to understand. "Why go to such lengths for someone they barely knew?" Wallace looked at me, genuinely taken aback. To Marlene, they weren't just random people, Dela. They were her neighbors. Out in these parts, that word means something different than what you're used to. Folks take care of their own because we all know the day is coming when we'll be the ones needing a hand. Back 20 years ago, when the Caldwell place caught fire and their barn burned to ash, Marlene was the one who pulled them back from the brink of losing it all. Dorothy held on to that memory. Leaving Marlene to fend for herself wasn't even an option, not when she finally had an opportunity to return the grace she'd been shown. My brain struggled to process a reality where aid was given freely, with no invoice attached and no immediate expectation of a payback. It was a place where a good deed from decades past forged a loyalty that stretched across entire generations. The concept was so far removed from my own life, it might as well have been spoken in an alien tongue. Our truck swung onto a slender dirt track, passing a beat-up timber sign announcing Thornton Ranch in peeling red paint. The path snaked its way across a pasture turned to deep gold by the touch of autumn, running alongside a stream that chattered over river rocks before climbing a gentle slope that laid the whole homestead out beneath us. Air stuck in my throat. The farmhouse didn't just sit on the land, it looked anchored there, as organic to the landscape as the trees themselves. It was a modest building, the white siding flaking away here and there, framed by a wraparound veranda that dipped a little low on the far side. Looming behind the main house was the barn, a giant crimson sentinel. Even with its patchwork roof, it held its ground with dignity against the towering mountains behind it. A shed stood off to the left, while the right side opened up into a corral lined with timber rails that had clearly weathered better days long ago. Yet it wasn't the buildings that silenced me. It was the earth itself. Endless undulations of grassy slopes murmured in the steady breeze, while stands of pine marched their way up toward far-off summits already dusted in white. Overhead hung a canopy of blue, so expansive it felt like a different planet compared to the eternal slate-gray skies I knew back in Portland. "Welcome home," Wallace murmured. I couldn't answer him. The knot of emotions in my chest left no room for speech. My bloodline had held on to this soil for 4 generations. My grandmother had wandered these slopes, repaired these very rails, and watched the evening light set the peaks afire, colors I knew only from pictures. And suddenly, the burden and the beauty belonged to me. Wallace killed the engine by the front walk and dropped the keys into my palm. "I'll hang back here," he said. "You should introduce yourself to the place alone." The stairs to the deck complained under my boots, every squeak of the aged timber sounding less like a protest and more like a hello. The entry door fought me for a second before surrendering, the hinges singing the song of metal that hadn't turned in a long while. Stepping in, I was hit by the scent of settled dust, antique timber, and a faint floral note I couldn't quite place. It might have been dried lavender, or perhaps the ghost of potpourri hidden away in a linen chest 50 years prior. I paused in the foyer to let my vision settle in the gloom, then began to drift through a home that held the narrative of a woman I never really knew. To my left lay the sitting room, anchored by a sofa that had lost its spring, draped in a blanket knitted by hand, and a solitary rocker. The chair sat facing the window to catch the afternoon sun, flanked by a stone hearth stained dark from thousands of winter fires. One wall was entirely given over to shelving, packed tight with books so well loved their spines had shattered from endless turning. Straight down the hall was the kitchen, compact and practical, featuring timber cupboards and a white basin marked with a ring of rust near the plug. A lone ceramic cup rested on the countertop like it had been placed there minutes ago, while a rag draped over the stove handle waited patiently for fingers that were gone forever. The paper calendar pinned to the plaster was frozen on the month of March. Time had stalled there 8 months back, the moment Marlene lost the strength to tear the sheet away. A heavy gray blanket of dust coated every surface, yet underneath, the rhythm of my grandmother's days was still visible. Her spectacles sat atop a stack of planting guides, just so. Her work boots waited by the rear exit, the dried earth on the soles preserving her final walk across the grounds. A crossword puzzle, only partially solved, remained on the dinette, the ballpoint still clipped into the crease of the newsprint. I moved through the stillness like a ghost, running my fingers over objects with a feather-light touch, terrified they might disintegrate if I made my presence too real. The bath featured a cast-iron tub on pause and 6-sided floor tiles that were likely the absolute peak of style 50 years ago. The sleeping quarters were tight but inviting. The main room was obviously hers, dominated by a bed dressed in patchwork and a bureau crowded with frames. The second room held almost nothing but a narrow cot and a plain bedside table. Drawn back to the main room, I lifted a frame from the vanity. My fingers shook. The image captured a girl, maybe 20-something, with raven hair cascading down her back, casually draping an arm over a mare's neck. She was mid-laugh, beaming at something the photographer didn't capture. Pure radiance lit up her features, a happiness so sharp it made my heart hurt. Flipping it over, I found a note scrawled in faint graphite. Rosalie, at 22. A spring snapshot taken just 12 months before she carried me, and 12 months before her world shattered. I let my gaze linger on her features, committing every shadow and line to memory. The slight wrinkle of her nose in mid-laugh, the upward slant of eyes that mirrored my own, the gentle curve of her fingers resting against the horse's mane. Radiance beamed from the photo. She was young and untroubled, unaware that the bright future she seems to promise herself would eventually dissolve. It was a glimpse of the days before the chemicals hijacked her soul, before Vernon forced her out, before she became a fugitive from the very people who were supposed to protect her. This was the woman she was, before the tragedy defined her. Placing the image carefully on the table, I stepped out into the air and made my way toward the old barn. The heavy sliding doors protested with a metallic scream of rust as I forced them along their tracks. Beams of light pierced the rotted roof, painting the gloom with stripes of floating dust. The air was thick with the scent of ancient straw, dry leather, and the ghost of livestock. Vacant stalls flanked the central walkway, their wood still scarred by the hooves and teeth of beasts that hadn't stood there in years. Rusted implements dangled from the walls, shrouded in thick, gray webbing. Neglected saddles sat drying out on wooden stands, the leather brittle and split. I headed for the northwest corner, following the instructions Marlene had left behind. Hidden behind a pile of decaying feed troughs that turned to dust under my hand, the floorboards appeared deceptively ordinary. I dropped to my knees and tested the wood until one plank gave way slightly beneath my palm. Digging my fingertips into the gap, I pulled the board free, paying no mind to the wood shards biting into my flesh. It revealed a dark cavity, roughly 2 feet deep. Resting at the bottom was a heavy, olive-drab metal container, resembling a military ammo box, sitting silent in its hiding place. Hefting the weight, I moved it into a patch of light near the wall. The latch fought me for a moment, but eventually gave way without a key. I raised the lid with trembling hands, the blood rushing in my ears loud enough to drown out the silence. Sitting on top was a stack of envelopes, bound together by a ribbon that had long since lost its color. They were all written to Marlene, but had come back sealed, marred by red ink stamps declaring "Return to sender" or "Address unknown." It was a graveyard of correspondence, my grandmother's desperate attempts to reach her daughter. Missives sent to places Rosalie had already abandoned. Proof of a mother reaching out into the void and finding nothing. Under the paper stack sat a velvet case containing a modest gold band and a locket hanging from a darkened chain. Clicking the locket open revealed 2 miniature portraits tucked inside. One showed Marlene in her youth, dark-haired and vibrant. The other was Rosalie, as a toothless, grinning preschooler. Beside the jewelry lay a leather-bound diary. The paper was brittle with age, covered in Marlene's script. Flipping it open, I landed on mundane logs of farm chores from a lifetime ago. Notes on the rainfall, new calves, and broken fences. She had meticulously recorded the first freeze of the season, the quiet, steady pulse of rural existence. Yet hidden among the chores were jagged entries of grief. Rosalie turned 26 today, one read, blurring my sight. Kept a candle lit until dawn for her. Further down, learned about Della today, a granddaughter. She is out there. She is alive, but they keep her from me. And later, drove to Portland, attempted to visit Della at the orphanage. Blocked at the reception, they told me I have no rights to her. Waited on the sidewalk for hours, praying to see her face. Nothing. I slammed the book shut, blinded by the tears welling up. Deeper in the box lay another envelope. But these photos weren't of my mother. They were of me. Annual school portraits from age 6 to 18, the standard mugshots taken for state records that usually gather dust in a caseworker's cabinet. Except someone had been watching. For 13 years, she had gathered these images, searching my face for traces of the lineage I was denied. And there were others, blurry, stolen moments captured from afar, across a playground or a parking lot, showing me simply living my life. There I was, captured in grainy, candid shots entering the library on Belmont. Another photo showed me perched on the cold stone steps of St. Mary's, nose buried in a paperback. Then came my high school graduation, a solitary figure drowning in a sea of joyful families, with no one of my own to cheer. Marlene had been a silent witness all along. For years, she had scraped together these stolen moments, documenting my survival, hoarding every distant fragment of connection she could manage from the shadows. I collapsed onto the dusty barn floor, hugging that cardboard archive against my ribs, weeping with a ferocity that frightened me. It was not simply sorrow, though that was woven through it. The feeling was vast and tangled. Relief, grief, rage, and thankfulness all knotted together so tightly I could not distinguish where one emotion ended and the next began. When I finally emerged into the late afternoon glow, Wallace was resting against his truck, possessing the patient stillness of the landscape itself. "You opened the box," he stated, his voice flat and knowing. "She saw me," I whispered back. 13 years of photographs. Wallace offered a slow, solemn nod. She paid folks to look in on you whenever she had the scrap for it. Private eyes at first, then just travelers willing to head up to Portland once or twice a year to bring back proof of life. It was the only way, Della. The law kept her away, but it could not stop her from loving you from afar. I gazed out at the homestead, the weathered house, the barn, and the sprawling fields that now bore my name. I am sleeping here tonight. Can you teach me how to run this place? Certainly, he said, though his tone shifted. But you need a warning first. A shadow crossed his rugged face. Vernon knows you have arrived. News moves like lightning in a valley this small, and he keeps his ear to the ground. Expect him within a day or two. He will be coming to stake a claim on what Marlene left behind. Let him come, I said, the words tasting like iron. He stole my mother from this family. He is not taking me. Wallace's gaze softened into genuine respect. Marlene had you pegged right. You have got her grit. He spent the next 2 hours giving me a crash course in survival on a dormant ranch. He taught me how to coax the water pump when it stalled, where the breaker box lived, and which switches controlled the different zones of the house. I learned how to gauge the propane levels for heat and cooking, and which fence lines were critical versus which could wait for the thaw. By the time his taillights faded into the day, at dusk, I knew just enough to keep breathing for a few days. And I held something entirely new, a sanctuary that was mine by right, a place I believed no one could seize. I woke to a morning brilliance piercing through grime-coated windows. Yet it was more natural light than I had known in ages. The old timber frame groaned and shifted, as if the house itself was yawning, adjusting to the pulse of a living heartbeat after so much silence. I brewed a pot in the kitchen using a battered percolator from the cupboard, the sort my foster parents owned but forbade us from touching. The rhythmic gurgle and the rising aroma of dark roast filled the small room, feeling like a phantom memory, as if I were performing my grandmother's morning ritual through blood instinct alone. Later, I walked into the village for provisions and ducked into the diner on Main. The hand-painted sign read Lorraine's, and the air inside was thick with bacon grease and roasted beans, the scent of honest hospitality that embraces you before a word is spoken. The matron behind the counter was a woman in her early 60s with silver, hair coiled in a no-nonsense bun, and a face mapped with lines that suggested a life of laughter and labor. She stopped dead, beaming as if my arrival were the only thing on her schedule. You have to be Della, Marlene's girl. She filled a mug before I could even sit. I wondered when you would find your way home. Your grandmother occupied that exact stool every Saturday for 30 years. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, and the weekly news. You knew her? I asked. Everyone in Silver Creek knew Marlene, but we were sisters in spirit. She spoke of you constantly, shared those photos, and dreamed of the day you would return. Lorraine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She made me swear an oath. She said when you arrived, I was to make certain you felt the welcome, to let you know this town belongs to you as much as it did to her. I wrapped my cold fingers around the hot ceramic, feeling a tight knot in my chest begin to unravel. Thank you for keeping her memory alive, and for the welcome. You belong here, Della. Never question that. Now, let us get you fed. You look like you need a solid meal after that journey. Later, as I sat picking at my breakfast, the hum of an engine drifted in from the road. It didn't rattle like a farm truck. It purred with expensive engineering. A few locals swiveled on their stools to peer out the glass. A pristine silver SUV rolled to a halt, its paint untouched by the dust of honest work. The driver's door opened. A man of about 45 stepped out, draped in an outfit worth more than my entire life's possessions. Crisp chinos, an immaculate shirt, and loafers that had clearly never met a speck of dirt. Silver touched his temples, manicured to perfection, and he walked with the easy stride of a man accustomed to having the world move out of his way. But when I saw his face, a knot tightened in my gut. I'd never met him, yet I knew exactly who he was. He bore the distinct stamp of our bloodline, the sharp jaw, The nose, the specific angle of the eyes that stared back at me from my own reflection. Vernon Thornton, my grandmother's estranged brother, the architect of my mother's ruin, now circling to scavenge the remains of her estate. He shouldered his way into the diner, freezing mid-step when his gaze locked on to me at the counter. A practiced smile stretched his skin, but his eyes remained hollow. "You must be Della. News travels fast. I'm your great-uncle Vernon. Figured I'd pay a visit. Welcome you to the fold." The ambient chatter in the room died instantly. The air grew heavy with unseen stares. "The family you shattered, you mean," I stated, keeping my voice steady. A shadow passed over his face, maybe shock, or perhaps just irritation that I wasn't going to fold easily. "I see Marlene filled your head with fairy tales." He smoothed his lapel. "My sister and I, we had our friction, but her version of history wasn't exactly reliable. She held on to grudges, saw enemies where there weren't any, often over slights she invented herself. She wasn't holding a grudge, she was defending her home. My home." Vernon's pleasant mask evaporated. "Maybe we should take this conversation elsewhere." "No need. Speak your piece right here." He scanned the silent audience and sighed. "Suit yourself. I'm here to offer you a way out, Dela. You're young, isolated, and broke. You don't have the experience or the capital to keep a dying ranch afloat. I'm putting $500,000 on the table. Considering the state of the land, it's a generous sum." I just looked at him. The man who pushed my mother into the grave was now trying to write a check to make me disappear. "Not for sale. Don't be hasty. I'd advise you to weigh your options before you dismiss me. $500,000 is freedom. You could build a new life anywhere. Start over, a clean slate." "No," I said. "Grandma wanted this land in my hands, not yours." The benevolent uncle act vanished, revealing the cold operator beneath. Marlene wasn't lucid when she changed that will. She was post-stroke, heavily medicated, and steered by a lawyer looking for a payday. "I can tie this estate up in probate for years. You'll burn through your savings fighting me and still end up with nothing. Try it. Let's see what a judge thinks of the man who lied to a dying girl and shoved her back into the addiction that took her life." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Color drained from his face, then rushed back in a flash of anger and panic. "You don't know the first thing about Rosalie." "I know enough." Marlene kept the records. Letters detailing how you took her call for help and told her she wasn't welcome. You knew she was trying to get clean, and you pushed her right back toward the needle. Her blood is on your hands." Vernon lunged forward, and for a second, violence seemed inevitable. Then he checked himself, remembering the audience. In a town this small, secrets didn't stay secret for long. The locals stared back at him, stone-faced. "You're playing a dangerous game," he hissed, his voice dropping. "You have no concept of what survival costs out here when you have no friends and no influence. You'll crash, Della, and when the dust settles, I'll be there to pick up the pieces. Get comfortable then, because as long as I have air in my lungs, you aren't touching this dirt." He held my gaze, searching for a crack in my resolve. Finding none, he pivoted on his heel and marched out into the afternoon sun. As the door swung shut, Lorraine covered my hand with hers. "That took courage, honey." "Vernon's been the local tyrant for 40 years. Rare to see someone push back." "He won't take what's mine." "No." Lorraine smiled warmly. "I don't think he will." Then, a quiet voice beside me broke in. "I need to ask you something. Ever felt the ground shake because someone tried to snatch the life you built right out from under you? Especially a bully who dismissed you as weak simply because they didn't know your history or the steel in your spine. Drop your story in the comments below. And if you think Vernon retreated with his tail between his legs, you are in for a shock. Hit that subscribe button because the situation is about to turn lethal. The following weeks were a blur of grit and sweat as I tried to breathe life back into that rotting farmhouse. My first Saturday on the land, the Caldwells rolled up. Frank was behind the wheel of a rusted pickup stacked high with lumber and fencing gear. Dorothy marched out with enough casseroles to feed an infantry unit. We aren't about to let Marlene's kin starve out here, she declared. I tried to refuse, but Dorothy shut me down. That isn't how we do things in Silver Creek, she insisted. You need help, you holler, anytime. Frank wasn't one for speeches, but the man let his work do the talking. He dedicated his entire weekend to securing my perimeter, teaching me the art of setting posts and tensioning wire. He made sure I understood the difference between a quick patch job and a repair that would survive 10 brutal winters. Your grandma was there when we were drowning, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the October chill. Fire gutted our barn 20 years back. We thought we were finished. Marlene was on our porch at dawn with a check large enough to start over. She refused to take a dime back. She told us neighbors don't keep score. Why would she do that for folks who weren't blood? Frank gave me a look of soft correction. Out here, Della, blood isn't the only thing that makes family. It is the only way we survive. This land is gorgeous, but it is brutal. Try to fight it alone, and it will bury you. So, we carry each other. That is the code. It was starting to click. I was used to a transactional world where every favor had a price tag, and kindness was a trap. This was different. Ancient. A bond forged in shared hardship and reliance. Your name was only as good as your word, and your status was measured by how much you gave. Breaking that faith was the ultimate sin, which made Vernon's cruelty toward Rosalie not just mean, but unforgivable. By week 2, I found an ally in the last place I expected. I was grabbing gear at the hardware store when I felt eyes on me. Across the road, a guy in his early 20s was watching me. He was leaning against a truck that had seen better decades, studying me with a look I couldn't quite place. He didn't flinch when I caught him staring. Instead, he pushed off the fender and crossed the street, confident but calm. "You're Della," he stated. It wasn't a question. "And you are?" "Nolan. Vernon's my dad." I froze, knuckles turning white around my bag of nails. Great. Another vulture coming for the carcass. But then I really looked at him. There was no aggression there, just shame. "I can guess what is running through your head," he murmured. "And you are right. My old man is rot. But I am not him, Della. I didn't come here to fight. I'm not here to take a thing. I just came to apologize for the hell he is raising. Why take the heat for him?" His jaw set hard. Because somebody has to. Marlene was more of a parent to me than he ever was. The way he treated her, the way he treated Rosalie, it eats me alive. Marlene didn't hesitate. She gave me a room, taught me the trade, and loved me like the grandson she was missing. I stared at him, my entire understanding of the battlefield shifting. "She never wrote about you." "Of course not. She wanted to shield you from this mess until you were strong enough to handle it. But I was there, Dela. I watched her pour her heart into letters she knew she couldn't mail. I saw her save every photo of you in that tin box in the barn. I know exactly how much you meant to her. Why are you telling me this now?" He took a deep, steadying breath. "Because my father isn't walking away. He is desperate, Della. He is in deep with some dangerous loan sharks. He sees your land as his only life raft. He is already lawyering up and poisoning the town with lies about Marlene losing her mind. He's not the type to give up. He believes he's owed that land. He's owed nothing. Knowing that is one thing. Proving it is another." The man hesitated, then reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. I was digging through my dad's old files, found logs from the house line dating back 23 years. March 15th, a 6-minute call from Seattle, followed immediately by a 30-second call to Marlene's number. My hands shook as I took the paper. Just columns of numbers, but they told the story of a betrayal. "Rosalie," I whispered. "I believe so." Then there is the matter of the call my father placed to Marlene, right after he likely fed her some poison about what Rosalie had said. I cannot produce a recording of the words spoken, but the logs prove the connection was made. They prove he was deep in the mire of a situation he has denied for 20 years. "Why entrust this to me?" I asked, looking up. "He is your old man, after all." Nolan's expression turned to stone. "He lost the right to that title the day he tossed me out like yesterday's trash. Marlene was more of a parent to me than he ever managed to be. And you carry her blood. That makes us kin too." Honestly, you are the only family left on this earth that I actually give a damn about. I studied this young man who shared my DNA, but had forged his loyalties on something far more substantial. He was torching his relationship with his father to hand me evidence of sins committed before we were even born. I appreciate it, I whispered. I am not sure how to use this weapon yet, but thank you. Just keep fighting, Nolan replied. Whatever dirt my dad tries to bury you under, dig your way out. Marlene intended for you to hold the deed to this place. She was the only decent soul in this entire lineage. Do right by her memory. He spun around, climbed into his pickup, and peeled out onto the road without checking the rearview mirror. I remained on the sidewalk in Silver Creek, Montana, clutching a stack of phone logs that suggested my great-uncle played a role in my mother's demise, wondering just how much heavier this inheritance was going to get. The reality check arrived 3 days later, hand-delivered by a deputy sheriff. Vernon was taking me to court. He was contesting the will, claiming Marlene had lost her faculties and had been manipulated by her attorney to cheat a brother out of a legacy that should have been divvied up among the survivors. He filed an injunction to freeze every asset in the estate until a judge could sort it out. A circus his lawyers estimated could drag on for 2 or 3 years. I sat at Grand's kitchen table, poring over the legal summons. My coffee went ice cold while my hands trembled, half from terror, half from pure, unadulterated rage. Wallace Brennan showed up less than 60 minutes after my panicked call, his leathered face grave as he skimmed the lawsuit. It is not completely baseless, he confessed reluctantly. Vernon's legal team pulled her medical history from the final years. They have documentation of the stroke and the cognitive decline that trailed it. Their argument is simple. She lacked the competence to rewrite her will when she did. But that is a lie. You were in the room. You drafted it. I know, and I will swear on a stack of Bibles that she was sharp as a tack. However, courtrooms are gambling dens, Della. Judges are human. They get swayed by sob stories about bloodlines and disinherited siblings. Vernon will play the victim, the mourning brother robbed of his only sister's estate by a crooked lawyer and a stranger of a granddaughter who swooped in like a vulture to steal his share. He pushed her daughter into an early grave. He wrecked this family. We just need to show the court who he really is. Proof requires funding and patience. Vernon is betting you are short on both. His strategy is attrition. He wants to bleed you dry until you accept a settlement just to make the pain stop. My mind went back to the logs Nolan handed me, the concrete proof that Vernon triggered the relapse that sent Rosalie spiraling. What if we can show he is responsible for Rosalie dying? Not holding the needle, but loading the gun. Wallace's head snapped up. What do you have? I laid it all out. Nolan's account, the call logs, and the potential impact if we could find people to back it up. Wallace fell silent, staring at the document like it was a map to a buried bomb. This shifts the entire battlefield, he finally murmured. If we can demonstrate that Vernon deliberately sabotaged Rosalie's recovery and blocked her reconciliation, that he lied to both women and contributed to the tragedy, it will vaporize any sympathy the judge might feel for him. It strips away the grieving brother act and reveals the predator underneath, a cruel man who chose profit over his own niece. So, what is the play? Corroboration. We need folks who saw the sabotage or heard him gloat about it. The whistleblower who tipped off Marlene 2 years back, or whoever was listening when he ran his mouth at the local bar. We have to hunt them down and get them on the stand. Where do we begin? Wallace offered a tight, grim smile. We start knocking on doors. In a town this size, there are no secrets, only delayed truths. If we shake the tree hard enough, something will fall out. Before the court date, Nolan and I embarked on a pilgrimage I had been avoiding, though I knew it was inevitable. We headed west to Seattle, tracking the address scribbled in my mother's suicide note, searching for the roadside motel where Rosalie waited for a rescue that never arrived. The Pinewood Motor Lodge was still there, defying gravity and health codes. It was a rotting 2-story structure with leprous paint and a neon sign that had burnt out in the 90s. The surrounding blocks had slid further into decay since my mother checked in 23 years ago. It was a shelter of last resort, a harbor for folks who had run out of road and luck. Gladys, a woman in her 70s, had held the deed for 15 years, but the echoes of the past still lingered in her memory. "The young woman in room 12, she murmured, her tone heavy with the exhaustion of witnessing too many heartbreaks under this roof. "It predates my tenure," she admitted, "but the folks before me spoke of her. They said she spent 3 days fasting, anchored to the telephone, praying for it to ring. She held on to the belief that her mama was on the way, that her exile was finally over." My knuckles turned white as I clutched the front desk for support. And then, after 72 hours, the waiting ended. Or perhaps the hope ran dry. Housekeeping discovered her body at dawn. It was an overdose. According to the medical examiner, she had maintained her sobriety for nearly a month, but that final night shattered her spirit, pushing her past the point of endurance. Nolan's hand settled on my shoulder, a grounding weight. "She was right there," I choked out. "She was on the brink of escape." "That is the jagged edge of it all," Gladys observed. She passed away convinced that her kin had forsaken her. She took her last breath feeling utterly abandoned, never knowing a mother in Montana was ready to tear the earth apart to bring her home. We departed the Pinewood Motor Lodge carrying fresh proof for the courtroom and a renewed, burning resolve to ensure Vernon answered for his sins. My own mother had perished within those walls, crushed by the weight of feeling unloved. Her surrender was caused by a malicious fabrication she had no means to disprove. I vowed to drag that truth into the light. The ensuing weeks blurred into a peculiar rhythm of physical toil and investigative persistence. By day, I labored on the land, assisted by the Caldwell family, and often Nolan, who ventured over on weekends regardless of the danger posed by his father. We mended broken fence lines, hacked away undergrowth, and tackled the myriad chores required to resurrect a dying homestead. Yet, as twilight fell, or whenever I ventured into the village, I turned inquisitor, engaging anyone willing to spare a moment. I spoke with the postmistress, the keeper of the lone tavern in Silver Creek, and the aged, patrons at Lorraine's Diner, who could recall an era when the Thornton name commanded deep respect throughout the district. Gradually, a portrait took shape. Vernon Thornton had forever been the outcast, the flaw in the family lineage. While Marlene was the bedrock, diligent and giving, Vernon was volatile, self-absorbed, and forever chasing the easy road to fortune. He had liquidated his inheritance in defiance of his father's final requests, wasted the capital on foolish ventures, and spent his remaining years pointing fingers at the world for his own shortcomings. Yet the specific account concerning Rosalie and the telephone conversation that determined her destiny stayed maddeningly out of reach. The community understood that a fracture had occurred between Vernon and his sibling. They knew why Marlene had severed ties 2 years prior, but the details were vaulted in tight-lipped silence, until my path crossed with Earl Dawkins. Earl was 83, residing in an assisted living facility in Missoula, a 3-hour journey from Silver Creek. He had served as a ranch hand for the Thorntons during the 70s and 80s, witnessing Marlene and Vernon mature and observing the foundational currents that steered the family's future. Furthermore, he had been present at a tavern in Thompson Falls 2 years back, when an inebriated and resentful Vernon Thornton broadcast his grimmest secret to the room. I navigated toward Missoula on a slate-gray morning in November, where the peaks vanished into a low ceiling of clouds, heavy with the promise of snow. The facility was a squat brick structure reeking of antiseptic and cafeteria stew, echoing with the drone of unwatched televisions and the shuffling steps of those wandering through the fog of memory. Earl was positioned in his wheelchair beside a pane of glass, gazing onto the asphalt below. His frame was brittle, yet his gaze remained lucid and piercing as I drew near. "You must be Marlene's grandbaby," he stated without hesitation. "You are the spitting image of Rosalie at that age. You share her eyes, and that obstinate line of the jaw. Mr. Dawkins, I need to inquire about an event from 2 years past, specifically Vernon's words in the tavern." Earl kept his peace for a good long while, his eyes wandering to the glass and the heavy clouds gathering on the other side. "I've been expecting that question," he murmured at last. "Knew the day would come when someone wanted the real story." "Marlene's memory demands it," Same goes for that young woman who never got to live a full life because Vernon Thornton couldn't bear his sister's joy. A wheezing breath rattled inside his frail chest. I was down at the Rusty Spur that evening. You know the spot in Thompson Falls. Hole in the wall where the ranch hands go to drown their aching muscles after a long week. Vernon was posted up at the bar, 3 sheets to the wind. Hadn't seen him that soused in ages. He was rambling on about life dealing him a bad hand, how Marlene was the golden child and he got scraps. Earl's weathered hands shook a bit as he pressed on. Then a fella asked about Rosalie. Asked if he felt any remorse over how he cut ties with his niece. And Vernon, drunk as a skunk, he just chuckled. It was a nasty, cold sound. Stays with me even now. He said, that addict got what was coming to her. She rang up the house weeping, begging to get clean. I made damn sure that door stayed shut. Told her her own mother washed her hands of her. Kicked her right back to the streets where trash belongs. I felt my stomach turn over. Just sick with anger and sorrow. It was the proof I'd been dreading, but expecting. He spilled his guts to a crowded room, counting on the liquor to wipe everyone's memory by sunrise. But I was stone sober. I was barely touching my drink, just watching him embarrass himself. I logged every single word. Went straight to Marlene the morning after. She faced him down, and naturally, he lied through his teeth. Called me a senile old fool spinning yarns. But Marlene? She knew. She rewrote her will that very week. You asking if I'll take the stand? Earl met my gaze with eyes that had witnessed 83 years of life. The best of folks and the worst. Families that bonded tight and ones that imploded. It would be my privilege, he stated flatly. Marlene was top-tier people. And Rosalie, that girl was doomed the second Vernon decided to play God with her life. If my words can stop him from ruining you like he ruined her, then absolutely. I'll be there, hand on the Bible. The drive back to Silver Creek happened under the season's first real snow. Heavy white flakes tumbled from the clouds, blanketing the peaks and making the world look pristine. Like a fresh start was actually possible. I finally had the ammunition I needed. A credible witness ready to swear Vernon admitted to sealing Rosalie's fate. Hard proof the phone calls took place. A history of malice that showed his true colors. A petty, grasping man who wrecked his own kin out of envy. But winning the estate wasn't enough anymore. I needed Vernon to feel the weight of his sins. I needed the town that ignored his behavior to finally look it in the face. And I needed to know why my mom died lonely in a Seattle motel instead of here, safe on the soil our ancestors tended. Nolan knocked on my door 2 days after I got back from Missoula. He looked ghostly pale, hands trembling as he passed me a thick envelope. I dug up something else, he muttered. And Dad's lockbox. I'm not sure how I'll explain busting the lock, but you have to see this. You deserve the whole picture. Inside were letters, stacks of them, dating back over 20 years, all addressed to Rosalie in Seattle, Portland, and half a dozen other spots. They were written by Marlene. All the mail she tried to send her daughter. The ones that came back marked "Return to Sender." Only the post office hadn't returned them. Vernon had grabbed them. He'd been tracking Rosalie for years, stealing every lifeline Marlene threw out and burying them in the dark. Rosalie never knew her mother fought for her. For 2 decades, she died thinking she was trash, unloved and cast aside. And it was all Vernon's design. Why? I choked out, looking at the faded ink and the pleas for connection. Why else? Nolan's voice sounded empty. Because he despised Marlene. Hated that Mom and Dad favored her. Hated that she got the lion's share of the land. That the town looked up to her while they side-eyed him. He couldn't break her, so he broke Rosalie instead. Robbed her of the one soul she cherished. Ensured they'd stay estranged. He killed my mom. Didn't pull a trigger, but he ended her life just the same. Yeah, and he would have skated by if Marlene hadn't pieced it together right at the end. If she hadn't made certain you got the ranch and came back here to dig up the bodies. If she hadn't made sure you would inherit everything and come here to discover what he did. I glanced at Nolan, the young man supplying the ammunition to ruin his own sire. Why are you doing this? The silence hung between us before he answered, his voice carrying a vulnerability I had never witnessed in him. Because Marlene gave me a life. When my father cast me out, I was merely 16, homeless, and devoid of anyone who gave a damn about my survival. She sheltered me, nourished me, and taught me that I wasn't doomed to mirror my father's cruelty. She demonstrated the true meaning of kinship, which bore no resemblance to the hell I was raised in. He locked eyes with me, his expression burning. You are of her blood. You remain the final vestige of her spirit walking this earth. If the decision lies between aiding you or protecting my father, there is no hesitation. There never has been. The proceedings began in early December, coinciding with a heavy snowfall that draped Montana in a suffocating layer of white silence. Every pew in the county courthouse was occupied by Silver Creek residents. A silent jury of neighbors gathered to witness the unveiling of Vernon Thornton's true nature. Earl Dawkins gave his testimony from his wheelchair, his vocal cords weak, but his resolve ironclad as he detailed Vernon's drunken confessions from 2 years prior. Then came the call logs, stark, irrefutable proof of the conversations that had irrevocably altered our paths. But it was the correspondence, those devastating, undelivered notes Marlene had written, that silenced the room. 2 decades of maternal longing spread out for the magistrate to examine. Gladys from the Pinewood Motor Lodge took the oath to speak on Rosalie's final hours, describing a girl who had held vigil by the telephone for 3 agonizing days, until her hope fractured and she returned to the substance that claimed her life. I took the stand at the very end to explain how I unearthed the truth of my grandmother's existence, detailing the contents of that dusty barn box, the realization of my heritage, and the theft of my history before I drew my first breath. Ms. Thornton, the judge addressed me as I prepared to step down. Do you have a final statement for the record? My gaze drifted to Vernon, whose bespoke tailoring failed to mask the panic rising in his eyes. Just this, I replied softly. The law prevented my grandmother from holding me for 13 years. My mother died, convinced she was unloved by her own kin. The architect of that misery is sitting right there, petitioning this court for soil he intends to liquidate to cover his bad debts. I turned toward the gallery, locking eyes with Dorothy and Frank Caldwell in the front row, seeing Lorraine wiping tears from her face, and noticing Opal, who had sacrificed a shift behind the bus wheel to stand with us. Marlene Thornton cultivated more than crops on that acreage. She grew a sanctuary of compassion, generosity, and belonging. She served everyone here without a thought of repayment, and left this world worrying she hadn't done enough. That is what Vernon aims to dismantle. He isn't just after the land, he wants to erase her spirit. Then, they called Nolan. He approached the witness box with rigid posture and a locked jaw, steadfastly refusing to acknowledge his father. Mr. Thornton, the judge cautioned, you realize your testimony could permanently sever ties with your father. I understand, Your Honor. Please continue. Nolan finally turned his cold gaze toward Vernon. That man ceased to be my family a long time ago. Marlene was the only real parent I ever knew. If my honesty helps her granddaughter preserve Marlene's wishes, I will say whatever is necessary. He spoke of unearthing the call logs, finding the stolen letters in the safe, and witnessing a lifetime of his father's manipulative cruelty toward anyone who stood in his path. When he stepped down, Vernon's high-priced legal team had run out of maneuvers. The court recessed, and we drifted out into the biting December chill to await the verdict. I found Nolan near the steps, his eyes tracing the snowflakes settling on the asphalt. You were brave in there, I murmured. I just stopped lying, he replied. Funny how powerful the truth feels. We waited in the quiet, bound by shared blood and the heavy task of defining who we were outside of our family's trauma. What is the plan if we win? Nolan eventually asked. When we win, I corrected gently. I'm going to restore the homestead, make it the haven Marlene envisioned. A space where people matter more than profit, where we nurture the soil rather than bleeding it dry. Sounds like a noble cause. I studied him, this stranger who had morphed into a brother. It sounds like a project that needs a partner, if you are interested." Before he could respond, Wallace burst through the doors, a smile threatening to split his face. "They are back," he announced. "It is unanimous. Vernon's claim is tossed. The will is valid. It is all yours, Della, every acre." The moments following are a blur in my memory. There were embraces, tears, and I believe Dorothy slipped a flask of something strong into my grip to ward off the cold. The Silver Creek community enveloped me, pledging support for the spring harvest and insisting I join their holiday tables. Yet, amidst the joy, my eyes were drawn to the solitary figure of Vernon descending the stairs, his attorneys lagging behind with looks of billable disappointment. He hesitated, and for a fleeting second we shared a look across the frozen lot. His eyes held a toxic brew of malice and crushing defeat, alongside something deeper, perhaps. The hollow realization of a birthright, squandered and lost forever. He turned his back on me then, vanishing from Silver Creek for good. As twilight settled, Wallace beckoned me into his study to tie up one final loose end. "Marlene left strict orders," he said, sliding a thick envelope across the mahogany desk. "This was to be yours only after the dust settled. She believed you needed the full picture before you could properly turn the page." I broke the seal right there, reading by the amber glow of his desk lamp while heavy snowflakes drifted silently against the glass. "To my darling Della," the handwriting began, a voice from the past reaching out. "If this letter is in your hands, the battle is over. You have stood tall against Vernon's deceit and emerged victorious, exactly as I predicted you would. That distinct Thornton grit is woven into your DNA, child, far sturdier in you than it ever was in him. But there is a final confession I saved for this quiet moment. I was never satisfied loving you from the shadows. The pain of knowing my granddaughter walked the earth without me seeing her face or hearing her laugh was simply too much to bear. So I improvised. Even when the courts and the distance built walls between us, I found a window. Mrs. Kim, that kind soul at the Portland Public Library, was a trusted friend of a contact I had. She agreed to be my eyes. She sent regular reports describing the novels you devoured and the quiet, resilient spirit she recognized in you. She mailed me snapshots whenever possible, allowing me to witness your journey from afar. The air left my lungs. Mrs. Kim, the librarian who had been my sanctuary for years, who never chased me out at closing time, who had gifted me that cell phone when I fled. She wasn't just a nice lady. She was an agent of my grandmother's love. Every odd interaction in that library suddenly snapped into focus. The way Mrs. Kim used to look at me with such pity and pride, her vague mentions of family, the lifeline of that phone. It was all calculated care. I know this may feel like an intrusion, and for that, I am sorry. But I could not stomach the idea of you navigating this world entirely on your own. I needed the peace of mind that comes with knowing you were safe, even if I couldn't be the shield protecting you. You were never truly isolated, Della. Not for a single second. I was always there, keeping vigil, praying for the day our paths would converge. And now they have, perhaps not in the flesh, and certainly not how I dreamed for 13 years. But we meet through this soil, through the heritage I passed to you, and through the courage you showed from the moment you opened my first note. Welcome home, Della. You have finally arrived where you belong. Now go claim the life you have earned. Build something lasting here. Find a partner. Raise a family. Allow yourself the joy and stability I was powerless to give you when you were young. And rest assured that wherever my spirit resides, I am bursting with pride. I always have been. I will remain your guardian for as long as love persists and memory holds. Your grandmother. Always. Marlene. I sat in that leather chair and wept openly. Wallace busied himself with files, granting me the grace to mourn and celebrate 13 years of a love I never knew I had. Trembling, I dialed the Portland Library. When Mrs. Kim answered, my throat was so tight I could barely speak. "You knew," I choked out. "You knew who I was the whole time. You were watching me for her." The line went silent for a beat before Mrs. Kim replied, her voice heavy with tears. "She adored you, Della. Every update I sent, every blurry photo, She hoarded them like they were precious gems. She was desperate to come for you, but the legal system blocked her, and her heart wasn't strong enough for a war. So, she improvised. She ensured you had a guardian angel, however distant. You must wonder why I never said a word. Marlene made me swear not to. She wanted you to find your way to this ranch on your own terms, driven by desire, not by a sense of debt to her. She didn't want a debt of gratitude. She simply hoped your heart would open as naturally as hers did. Tears choked my voice, so I stayed silent while Mrs. Kim filled the quiet. She wove a tapestry of the past, old correspondence with Marlene, snapshots frozen in time, and the quiet faith they both nurtured that I'd eventually stumble back to my roots. Placing the receiver down, I left the lawyer's office and steered toward the homestead, navigating a world slowly disappearing under a fresh coat of snow. 2 weeks later, Christmas Eve marked the very first celebration I ever hosted within the walls of Thornton Ranch. The Caldwell clan arrived with a feast large enough for an army, while Lorraine shut down her diner early just to walk in with pies still radiating oven heat. Opal made an entrance with her husband in tow, clutching a bottle of bubbly for the toast. Wallace Brennan brought his better half, and against the odds, Earl Dawkins journeyed down from Missoula, wrapped in heavy wool and sheer grit, eager to lay eyes on the earth he'd fought to save. Then there was Nolan, moving quietly between setting places and feeding the stone hearth, ensuring every soul present felt at ease. I paused on the veranda as the daylight began to retreat, behind the peaks, looking in at the tribe I'd found, gathering in the shelter that was finally mine. Laughter and low voices warmed the air. The savory aroma of a holiday meal drifted through the halls, and I felt a certainty that Marlene was observing it all. Retrieving that initial snapshot from my pocket, I traced her features one last time in the dimming twilight. "I'm grateful," I murmured to the wind, "for holding on, and for guiding my steps back to this soil." A breeze sifted through the evergreens, delivering a scent composed of winter air, burning cedar, and new beginnings. In the distance, a coyote sang out to a companion, and I stood grounded on the timber that once belonged to my grandmother, but now answered to me. Encircled by the kin I'd selected and those who'd claimed me in return, finally grasping the true weight of belonging. I appreciate you walking this path alongside me, from the very first step to this quiet conclusion. If Della's journey resonated with you, consider joining our growing community by subscribing. Narratives about endurance, self-discovery, and unearthing roots when you felt rootless. These stories hold immense weight. It teaches us that where you start doesn't dictate your value, and a history of scarcity can't rob you of a future filled with purpose. Even those who enter this world without a safety net or a guiding star are worthy of deep affection and a sanctuary to call home. Clarity might arrive behind schedule, but if you're brave enough to look it in the eye, it still carries the power to mend wounds. She refused the path of least resistance, stood tall against threats, and declined to trade her heritage for a quick escape from hardship. Instead, she planted her feet, guarding her birthright, and in the process preserved the dignity of those whose voices had long been silenced. We also learned that kinship isn't defined by DNA, but by the people who refuse to leave when we are breaking apart. Invisible threads of connection can hold strong for years, supporting us before we even realize they exist. Genuine devotion doesn't need a megaphone. Sometimes it's a quiet sentry, waiting patiently to help us believe in goodness again. Above all, the core lesson is to never surrender your claim to a place in this world. Regardless of a childhood marked by lack, neglect, or pain, the power to construct your own sanctuary remains yours. It's built less with mortar and timber, and more with bravery, compassion, and the unwavering conviction that you are worthy of joy.